Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am John DeLynn, one of your co-hosts for today. It's July 15th, I believe. And again, I am joined for part two of this important interview with Ali Christiansen, co-hosting my amazing partner, Margi. Hey, Margi.
Hello.
So great to have you.
Thank you. Yeah. Happy to be back.
Welcome back for part two.
That's right.
How was lunch?
Great.
All right. Well, we're here with Ali. Hey, Ali, welcome back.
Hey.
And we just spent a good, 3-ish hours talking about your Mormon story, a little bit about your pioneer ancestors, which is normal, but we talked about you growing up in a small town outside of Delta, Utah called?
Leamington.
Yep. Where you were a high-performing, maybe semi-perfectionistic Mormon young woman, doing all the things, checking all the boxes, maybe not being fully in tune with yourself, your feelings, your identity, and certainly not feeling comfortable sharing your thoughts and feelings with others through the time of getting into BYU and serving a Mormon mission in North and South Dakota. Mm-hmm. And where we left off was you coming back from a successful mission, finding someone you fell in love with. His name is
Zach.
And getting engaged and married in the temple to Zach, and learning a little bit about sexuality, asexuality, gray sexuality, demisexuality along the way. And that was part one. How does that sound for a summary?
Pretty accurate.
Did we do okay?
Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to be covering for part two is, you're back at BYU, you're now married, and you're starting to rise the ranks of, I'll just say, vocal performance at BYU, where you're auditioning for various choirs, you're getting into various choirs, and you're starting to perform at the highest level of choral performance at BYU, which is amongst probably some of the most, as far as undergraduate universities go, some of the highest caliber vocal performance programs in the country.
Yeah.
Fair to say?
Yeah, we have really, really good choral faculty, and just faculty in general, but really awesome choirs.
Yeah. And I guess the rub for this part two is going to be addressing an issue that is a lot of BYU students and Mormons are facing in 2022 and beyond, which is what happens if you're a BYU student. You went to BYU as a full believer, you signed the honor code, you're years into your education, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars into your education. And then what happens at BYU if you lose your faith, knowing that oftentimes at BYU, historically, the consequences have been getting kicked out and losing up to a couple years of your education and tens of thousands of dollars as you have to transfer, lose a lot of credits, and start over in many instances, not to mention the familial and social shame of being kicked out of a church school. So that's going to be part two, how you dealt with a change in your faith, confronted with doubts, while a temple married returned missionary BYU student.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So where should we begin for part two?
Probably the fall of 2019. So that was the first semester that Zach and I were both in school together, like a normal school semester when we were married. And that was also the first semester that I finally made it into BYU Singers, which...
Tell people about that.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
If we recall from part one, that was kind of like my dream for my life since I was little. So BYU has 4 auditioned choirs. 3 auditioned kind of classical choirs. It's 4. It's men's chorus, women's chorus, concert choir, and then BYU Singers. And it's really hard to get, honestly, into any of them. There are a lot of amazing singers that never got the opportunity to sing in any of the choirs because there are just so many students who want to do it. So my first 2 years in BYU, before I made it into the program, I was able to get into BYU Women's Chorus and concert choir. And then my first year as a freshman in the voice major, so I was technically a junior that year, but I was a freshman in my major, I was in concert choir, and I had a lovely time with that faculty member, Sister Hall. She's amazing, does really, really great stuff. But it was still my dream to be in BYU Singers, which is the most like elite, smallest choir, and they are also the choir that tours. So I was hoping to be able to be like a part of the choir when they were doing their next international tour, because they do that like every 3 or 4 years. So that was a thing that I thought would be really cool. But I made it through the audition process. I learned all the things I needed to know about how to sing in BYU choirs, because I had sang in them for years at this point. And I made it into BYU Singers, and the audition, it was so scary, but I was so excited and thrilled to finally be in it. And I was like, it was kind of everything that I had ever wanted in life was happening, was how it felt.
So the BYU young woman Mormon dream is coming true.
Yeah.
Even more and more.
Yeah. And so I guess at the time I was starting to notice, like, well, I knew it wasn't a slow noticing. I wasn't like the best soprano in the school. There are just lots of really talented people there, and I was by no means the best. So I never really like found my niche in wanting to do the operas, because if I did them, I would just like be in the chorus, which is actually turns out fun. But at the time, it didn't feel like it was as worth the time commitment as doing choirs. So I just kept wanting to do choirs. So being in BYU Singers was really everything I ever imagined, but like more. We had a really awesome director, and it was really intimidating at first because I felt like it had taken me so long to get in, plus it had taken me 3 years of auditioning just to get into the program. So I always kind of felt like I was a little bit behind, whereas a lot of people are so gifted that they get in like right as freshmen, you know. I was a little bit of a late bloomer. So I felt kind of self-conscious about that, but I loved the music. There's very high expectations of like learning music really quickly, memorizing quickly so that we could do all the different performances that they would need and all the different competitions throughout the year. And I guess it was just, I would go and do all my other classes, you know, and sometimes college sucks. But anytime I went to choir, it was just like, it's just what I needed. Yeah. It was also very tied to my faith at that point, you know. It felt like, kind of like the hand of God had intervened to finally like make this path work out for me, since it had been so hard to kind of get things to work. And I had, you know, it felt like almost every day a really meaningful spiritual experience with singing really beautiful music that had, you know, sometimes we did arrangements of hymns that were really touching, or just beautiful music in general. And our director really liked to take the time to talk about like, what does this mean to everyone? So we would kind of have like spiritual moments, and every week we'd also have time to do devotionals. And I like to do those as often as I could. 'Cause I don't know, I loved like the combination of like choral church music with testimony is just like the best thing, you know? Super happy about that. And as the year progressed, I started to notice some things. I was back in BYU Counseling, and I had a new counselor that I was working with, and she was, I think, close to retirement. So she knew a lot. She was really smart, really well trained, and she recognized pretty quickly that I could use some help learning about self-compassion. She recognized I did not have much of that. So we started talking about that. She helped me make meditations that were like personalized to me that I would like listen to practice being kind to myself. And I started to learn that demanding perfection of yourself all the time is not only unkind, but unreasonable and even impossible. And then I would go to I was in a married, like, kind of building ward at that point, although most of us were young BYU couples. I would then go to church on Sundays, and in sacrament meeting, people would frequently talk about how much, like, kind of the Mormon self-flagellation thing of like, oh, I'm so terrible. I can never do anything right. I'm not good enough. I need to try harder. And I started to notice that and think, I don't like that. And that's not great. So that kind of was bugging me. But I was like, well, it's probably just like, because I'm in Provo, you know, once I graduate, people will be a little more woke. I'll be okay. So I kept learning about that about myself. And then the more I was learning about self-compassion and taking time to go to counseling in school and, like, you know, working through miscommunications and, you know, marriage with my husband, I was realizing too that there were a lot of people around me who were suffering and that it wasn't just me. And that was kind of weird. Like, oh, I'm not the only one who's like kind of messed up and broken. Like, we all are. And like, maybe we shouldn't all be so like sad and stressed and depressed. If I thought about it, it started to seem odd. So I was noticing that, having some cognitive dissonance around that. So the end of that school year was 2020. So I was at that point kind of like preparing for a recital. And getting ready to sing and kind of do all the things that I was looking forward to about my major. It's exciting to give a recital and also stressful. And I also was super loving BYU Singers, and that like summer we had stuff planned. Anyway, I was really excited about it, and I was also participating in one of my friends' choirs. There's a group called A Voice for Good. It's like several student composers in Provo, BYU, who are composing different things and like trying to get different oratorios and choirs going, and it's their job. And I was a part of that, and they were doing a restoration choir theme because it was like the 200-year anniversary of the first vision, I believe. And at first I was really excited.
Of Joseph Smith's first vision.
Oh, yeah, of Joseph Smith's first vision.
Yeah.
So at first I was really excited, and I got signed up for that, and I even convinced Zach to do it with me. I've gotten him to do a few music things with me, but late, you know, as time goes by, he's like realized we are not the same people, and he does not have the same interests as me, and I can't make him do all the music stuff, and that is okay.
Margi's nodding.
It's beautiful.
Differentiation for the win.
Yeah. So we were both doing it. But the rehearsals were pretty demanding, and they were asking more and more of like memorizing and stuff. So after a while, Zach was like, this is too much. I can't do it. But I kept going. But I was feeling more and more uncomfortable with the themes of like Joseph Smith. And I was kind of against my will, recognizing that I felt uncomfortable constantly talking about like Joseph Smith and the gospel. And I started to realize I was kind of having doubts. And it was really scary. But I most of the time would just think like, no, it's nothing, it's fine. I'm just like, it's fine. Just kind of say, no, it's fine. It's not happening.
So this is the first time in 3.5 hours where you mentioned doubts at all.
Yeah.
So can you describe if there were any cracks that had developed or if there was any source of information? Or, I mean, I guess you mentioned last episode your older brother and sister both losing their faith while at BYU, but that you didn't really, and your dad having a faith crisis in the 1980s and you catching him listening to some podcast and feeling anger at him.
Yeah.
But so far you've mentioned nothing about anything that would cause you to question Joseph Smith. So do you want to take us through that a little bit? Yeah.
So that's a good clarification. So there was like nothing that I had learned about Joseph Smith that I was uncomfortable with, but it was a slow amalgamation of noticing like for instance, the people who run the program that I was part of were really gifted, but they were also really overworked. And they were like, it seemed like they were running themselves to the bone in order to like fulfill their callings, fulfill their dreams, take care of their families, be students. And it was just like it felt ugly inside of how much people were sacrificing. Which itself was like, I was like, I'm not supposed to have this feeling. I'm not supposed to feel this way. And then, notice, I didn't ever like read anything historical, but then I knew that there were like students who were like gay and they were having a really hard time in school and they were really scared to talk about it. And at this point, Zach kind of came to me when we were at home, and one day he just kind of broke down. He told me that he was really scared. But he'd been having some doubts. And I said, me too. But, we were sure we would get through it because we both knew the gospel was true. But it was just starting to get harder and harder to, do all of the extra things that I was doing. And not only noticing like, I'm just exhausted. And the people around me are exhausted. It just kind of started to wear on me. So I did my junior recital, and then a week later.
That's like a big vocal performance, right? Mm-hmm. As part of your steps to graduation.
Part of your requirements is you have to like do the junior recital is a joint with another student. You both sing together for an hour. And it went well, but I was trying to like meditate and stuff, but I still had a lot of anxiety. So that was frustrating. I was trying on so many levels to like kind of heal all my anxiety and like keep performing and not have any doubts or not like notice that things weren't okay everywhere, where I used to have this like very, very rosy colored glasses, I guess, rose tinted glasses about like when I would look around BYU and other people, it seemed like everything was like perfect and fine. And I started to see that it wasn't so much. And I think that year was the year I sang like in general conference, which was really cool.
A solo or with a choir?
In the choir, yeah. So once in a blue moon, instead of having the tabernacle choir or just like a local choir, they will have BYU choirs come and sing for general conference. So you have to get there like super early and have everything all ready and make sure you have all the right outfits and things. And we all knew how to put on the right TV makeup. Everything was really very carefully planned. And then, we got to like be in there and sing for conference. It was really cool, really neat experience.
And you're sitting right above the first presidency of the Quorum of the 12, right there on the stand in this big auditorium that seats, 20,000 people.
Yeah.
But like the pinnacle of Mormon spirituality in many ways.
Yeah. It was really, really cool. But also there are just like a couple times I would notice like even, general authority, auxiliary president, apostles say things that I was like, I don't know if like that's a good idea. Like maybe be a little more gentle, maybe be a little more forgiving to yourself, to others, maybe expect less perfection. So
in their talks?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You started noticing that the general conference talks were kind of almost reinforcing perfectionism within Mormonism.
Yeah. And I started to realize like, it's not just my ward and it's not just BYU. It's like coming from the top. That was really uncomfortable. Because, at that point I had the habit of every morning while I was getting ready, I was like listening to the last session of general conference on my phone. And then, like that night you like study scriptures and write in your journal. But it's really uncomfortable when you hear something and you disagree with it. Because I guess at that point I didn't know that was possible to like hear something from like established scripture basically and disagree with it. And I felt like so crazy. Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to question or doubt in Mormonism.
No, because like the leaders talk to God and they know what you need.
So through this time, are you listening to the meditations from your...
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so interesting, this idea of you going in for therapy, for counseling, and receiving maybe an insight and a practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I notice self-compassion, and here are some things to practice. And then you start, so you have that, and then you start practicing, and then it feels like all of a sudden you have like a new way of seeing things around you, and all of a sudden you're seeing it. Oh, it's actually not just me. Oh, look, it's there. Oh, it's also there. I'm experiencing it here in my... Mm-hmm. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, well, and one of the the main theme of like kind of the meditations or self-belief ideas we were trying to work on was the idea that I can trust my inner compass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I could trust my inner compass. That was one of the phrases that kind of sticks out to me. And it was like, the more that I was listening to myself, like the more I was noticing was not okay with myself and with the world around me. But I kept being told by a BYU professional that I was doing the right thing by listening to myself. So I kind of, I knew that there were a lot of, even the faculty that I interacted with, but just in BYU in general, I knew there were so many people who had lived in this kind of world and they made it work. So I knew that there was an answer, and I knew I just needed to kind of stick with it and figure it out, because I really trusted. And I really looked up to these people. And I knew that they were happy, and so I really had faith that I could just I would figure it out. And my scripture study got to be a little more about less just the standard rehashing stuff from my mission, relearning about baptism, faith, repentance, and getting more into where in the scriptures can I find themes of self-compassion and loving yourself, of kindness, of forgiveness, of tolerance. And I just kind of had to not every conference talk maybe listen to on repeat. I was that's probably just a message for someone else. They're just in a different place. And this is where I am. So I just felt like I was maybe a little more nuanced, maybe a little more aware. And I also knew culturally that the church over time changed as people were more informed about things. So I kind of thought, maybe I'm just a cutting edge Mormon and I can help kind of lift up the people around me and help them know that, your faith doesn't have to tear you down. So I was doing that for a while, and I think it was working for me really well. And then the pandemic.
I kind of call this becoming a progressive Mormon.
Oh, yeah?
A little bit. Just, I don't want to put a label on it, but once you realize maybe everything isn't perfect, maybe it's not all healthy for you, maybe there's a more flexible way to approach things, maybe there's not a one size fit all. That, to me, that's kind of becoming less of a fundamentalist Orthodox Mormon, becoming a little bit more progressive, maybe starting to explore unorthodoxy a little bit. I don't want to put that label on it, but that's what I think of.
Yeah. Well, and that school year, I had wanted a temple working shift. I wasn't able to get it to work with my schedule, so I had decided I was going to volunteer in the laundry department, and it was pretty fun. So I still felt like I was staying involved in important ways. So it didn't feel like anything was slipping. It just felt like I was getting a better understanding of God kind of, and of myself, and of how I can I felt like I was just becoming more aware of how I could interact with the world in a way that was more sustainable and more godly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was a conference talk by Elder Holland in 2016, because it was at the end of my mission, when I was thinking about how do I go home and how do I keep my faith really strong, because I was worried about that. And he talked about how the first law of heaven is obedience or something, but then the first something is obedience, but then the other first something is love. So I thought, I can be obedient, but also God is love, and that's the most important thing. So that the gospel started to mean to me not just following all the rules and ticking everything off the box, but like it's most important to love yourself and other people and make sure we're all doing okay. So that's kind of how I made that make sense.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's the way the church would want all Mormons to be, even today, just more compassionate. I mean, more and more over the years, I've heard general authorities try and reduce the emphasis on self-criticism, on perfectionism, and to try and encourage a little bit more self-compassion, kindness, self-kindness. So I would even say, maybe it wasn't right to call that progressivism. Maybe it was just, I like your words better, a compassionate, sustainable sort of approach to religion and Mormonism.
Yeah. It was a little bit scary. It was really scary to like kind of start feeling around my foundations and realizing it wasn't all the way that it had been forever, and maybe it wouldn't be always, I wouldn't always have the same perspective forever, but it felt so like obviously right, when I checked within my own inner compass. It's like, obviously this is what God would want. So it was sometimes hard, but mostly working. And then school was shut down for the pandemic. It was like March of 2020. And that was, its own level of terror. We all kind of lived through that and had our own experiences. It was really scary for the singing student world because at that point we didn't know everything, but it was starting to say like, this could be really bad for your lungs.
Like choir members across the world were dying or getting really sick after singing with their choirs.
Yeah.
It was almost like during the pandemic, singing in a choir was potentially
the most dangerous thing you could do.
Right. Yeah.
So like we all had to have choirs shut down, and we were all like nervous that we would never are we going to be able to go back to school in the fall? Are we going to be able to do choir again? Like, what about there were a lot of students whose recitals were canceled and they had to do them like streamed over Facebook in their apartment because you couldn't graduate if you didn't do it, but it's just such a disappointment. I was really lucky. My recital happened like a week before school shut down. And that was also a really big summer for Black Lives Matter, at least in my life. That was the summer where George Floyd was murdered. And since I was just kind of at home, isolated for quarantining for the pandemic, I was really glued to the news. I think a lot of us were. And I started to realize, like, this is still a problem. This has been a problem for a long time, and it's still a problem in the church, and we're not doing anything about it. And why isn't, like, if ever there was a case to, like, shake someone on the head, if you're God, I feel like, isn't this one of them? I feel like you just got to do it. So that was, like, super frustrating. And I also, I think a lot of us had experiences where we kind of yelled at different people we knew on Facebook, trying to make them see what we saw. And we were so entrenched in what we believe, and they were so entrenched in what they believe. And it just was like, it really didn't work. And that happened to me a few times. And it was really discouraging to see, like, people who I believed were really, like, good LDS people had such different values and such different perspectives in the world. And then I also...
And I'll just... without ever wanting to get political on Mormon Stories, like, because of the history of Ezra Taft Benson in our church, Mormons, particularly in Utah, but throughout Mormonism in the United States, tend to be Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not just true about Mormonism, but also kind of more conservative Christianity, evangelical Christianity, whatever political religious alliances that started emerging during the Reagan era of the 80s, the more synonymous it became in the United States for conservative religious people to also identify as Republican.
Mm-hmm.
So this is taking Mormonism and even partisanship out of it as politics in the United States have become more polarizing and divisive. Younger generations that tend to be more liberal or progressive in their politics found themselves more at odds with their religious traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And just broadly in the U.S., it's been one of the main reasons cited for the disaffection of younger people from their religious tradition. Is that fair to summarize kind of what you were feeling?
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely not helping. Definitely did not help.
Yeah.
I had been serving as the ward organist. So I had I took a semester of organ classes so that I would know how, because my church had an actual pipe organ, which was super cool. So I did a semester of classes, and I played the organ for my ward. And I also was the choir accompanist. And then there was one week that I was at church and sitting in sacrament meeting, and they announced that they had called a choir accompanist, and they sustained her. And I was like, what? I had no idea. And so I talked to the choir director before calling someone to this calling, which was already filled. So I guess I tell that story to say I was starting to notice patterns of ignoring women in the church. And it was starting to get annoying and frustrating. And I thought if they would just, sure, they could make the call themselves, but why didn't they even just talk to her? So that was really frustrating. One of my siblings came out to me as non-binary that summer, and I thought that was great. And I had been feeling hopeful that the church was going to be updating maybe the family proclamation to be a little more inclusive, because I was getting ideas about gender maybe being a little more nuanced than I was taught growing up, because that's just what people say is their experience, and you have to trust that.
So in the LDS Church proclamation on the family, and just within general Mormon discourse,
Mm-hmm.
it's male, female, it's man, woman. Gender is eternal, meaning that it exists before we're born into this earth life. It exists in a pre-earth spiritual state. So our spirits exist before we're born on this earth. Our spirits have gender before we come to this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And when we die, our spirits continue with gender, and it's binary.
Yeah.
So you're growing up in near Delta in urban Utah, going to BYU, serving a mission. Your 25 years have been all experiencing a very binary sense for gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
What would even, aside from your sibling coming out to you as non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
did you start to have an awakening about gender identity expression before your sibling comes out to you, or was that the impetus?
Well, I think they kind of, in an effort to see how open I would be about things, a year ago had suggested I watched this YouTube channel called ContraPoints. I don't know if you've watched ContraPoints. I love her channel. And that is a channel, just kind of general, kind of cool philosophy essays. But some of them are about, being transgender and gender experience, as well as other cool topics that are fun to get deep in and talk about. So I had been watching that for like a year, and everything really made sense to me that she said, and that other people who were having different experiences than like the very standard heteronormative cisgender experiences. And I was starting to think, well, I think a lot of my culture, and I think a lot of my religion, is just very influenced by cultural values that were around at the time. So we just need an update. Like, it makes sense. Like, okay, this is actually how I made sense of why the Bible didn't talk about evolution. I believed in evolution, and I had been taught by my parents that evolution was real. Like, that for me was never something I worried about. But it made sense to me that when God taught about how he built the earth to early people, that he wouldn't have had all of these like intense, like, this is how long this was. And it was like billions of years. Like, it's impossible for people to understand DNA and everything. So it's like, it can just be a short story, and that like works to tell the narrative. So I figured, like, in that same way, the way that people were able to understand like the role of men and women or whatever was just kind of what they culturally could conceive of at the time. So I was just kind of waiting for more revelation to update the church's stance on this topic. And I was pretty confident it would happen. In that summer, there was, in 2021, I guess, there was a church handbook update. Was it 2021 or was it 2020? I think it was 2020. It's
been happening a lot these days, but
I think the one I'm thinking of was 2020.
Yeah.
And I don't remember why I was looking, but I ended up like going in and reading the update because the handbook at that point was available to public. And I could see all these points where instead of like making space to like say allow transgender men to like get the priesthood, or like, yeah, you can be non-binary, whatever, and still like have a calling, they were instead laying the foundation to like how to deal with that and not let it happen.
So like discouraging Mormon youth from alternative gender identity expressions from the gender they were assigned at birth.
Yeah. Telling them not to dress differently than what they were assigned at birth. Putting in the handbook expressly clearly that like you should not do surrogate pregnancies because it seemed to me like, oh, they don't want people who both biologically can't conceive a child, like a gay couple, for example, to have a child.
And also discouraging surgeries related to gender identity or gender expression, and like forbidding, I don't know, temple access or even potential threatening disciplinary action for members who undergo full gender identity transition.
Yeah.
Either culturally or surgically. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's probably more to it than that, but that's kind of like what I remember, and just being like, oh, really? Like, that is so disappointing and so frustrating. Like, Heavenly Father, why would you do this?
What was frustrating about it, though? Go one level deeper.
What was frustrating?
Why'd you care?
I believed people who say how they feel inside, because I was starting to learn to believe what I felt inside. Yeah, once you pay attention to yourself, you realize my inner world is real. and so is yours. And in the same way that no one can tell me how I feel, you just can't, right? You can't do that. In the same way, I can't say that to someone else. So that kind of paves the way to say, oh, if you say this is how you feel, like, that is how you feel. I have to trust that. And there are a lot of people who say that's how they feel.
So if someone's assigned male at birth, the gender identity of male at birth, but they come to feel like their gender identity is better expressed as a female or as a woman or as non-binary, you're saying you started to say we need to believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, maybe I was starting to be too crazy. Maybe I was a bad Mormon at this point, but I didn't really see any doctrinal reasons why that wouldn't make sense. Like, sure, like Heavenly Father makes all of us like really unique and special. And why wouldn't it be that way? Like, there's a place for all of us in every way, and we all need to feel loved, and God wouldn't make you this way on accident, you know? That's how it made sense to me. So realizing that change that I was expecting to happen, I was expecting in the same way that like as we culturally learn more things and understand more things, like changes happen. I thought that would happen, but it wasn't happening the way that I thought it should be. And I knew that I was not anyone. I was like, I'm just a person. I'm nothing like crazy special. So like the fact that just like random people are noticing this and being upset with it means like it's probably time for it to be happening, right? I also took a philosophy class at BYU that summer.
Oops.
Because it was a general that I still had a few generals left. And we talked about the problem of evil and how some people think the existence of bad in the world disproves the existence of God, or at least the existence of a loving God. And that I kind of realized like, yeah, I'm kind of having that question right now. And they actually did have some like arguments written by different BYU professors or other Mormon theologists, but nothing they said like made sense to me. So
if I'm understanding it right, so it's if God's all powerful and all loving, then why is there suffering in the world? Mm-hmm. Either God's not all loving or not all powerful.
Right.
Is that the dilemma?
Yeah. And kind of like the understanding that used to make sense to me was like, well, we all have to have agency. So like we can choose to do bad things in this world or the next whatever, and we'll be punished later. But just like the system of that started to like, well, why would it be set up that way in the first place? And I realized it all kind of, that argument at least hinged on just saying agency is really important. But I was like, is it really so important to like have to suffer and go through turmoil? I don't know.
It's one thing when it's kind of suburban middle class angst, but when you start looking at the type of suffering experienced, more severe suffering here and elsewhere, but definitely in developing countries, war, poverty, famine, it starts to stretch for some credulity.
Yeah. And I don't know if this was when the leak happened, but this was when I became aware of how much money that the church had. And I was pretty flabbergasted that they weren't doing anything with that money. Like, I could just think like even just Salt Lake City has so many people who are homeless and need help. And if I could help, I would. I can't really do anything, but certainly if I had $100 billion, I could fix that. Like, I could even just build a super fancy hotel and just like come live here. Like, something. I would do something.
Not just grow your investments.
Yeah,
grow
I
your
mean,
investments
sure, you can leave enough in there that it grows, but I'm sure there's a little bit that you can use to save people.
And what we know now is that the only two things the church has done with that money from Ensign Peak is build a commercial shopping mall, City Creek, and bail out a failed insurance company. And to this date, none of that $150 billion investment fund has been used for any charitable purpose at all.
Yeah. And in fact, like, a lot of that money has been used for legislation that harms a lot of people too.
Like the church using its money to lobby against the LGBTQ community as an example.
As an example, yeah.
Anti-trans legislation.
Yeah. And it was at this point that I was kind of becoming aware of my blindness in the past to these issues. You know, I was on my mission when they made the change of, children of parents who are in gay relationships can't be baptized. And then they switched it. And at the time I was like, I don't really care. I trust the prophet. They're doing what's right. And then I was starting to feel like really like embarrassed and guilty about like having been so blind at the time. And I started to realize like that hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that summer was hard for a lot of people.
Tell me if it's also true, if it's during COVID now, you're not attending church.
Right. I was not attending church. So for a while there just wasn't church, and then they started doing it on Zoom, but it was still pretty different. So there were several weeks there in the summer that I just didn't go to church at all. And I was either able to kind of just forget all of these issues that were like driving me so crazy, or have the time to like kind of feel through it without having to like put everything on hold because no, I just need to put a smile on and go to church. Yeah. So that summer I thought I should probably get actual therapy. Like, free BYU counseling is cool, but I think I want like a trained therapist.
Well, to be clear, therapists at CAPS at BYU are largely PhD level psychologists.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give the impression that those aren't real therapists, but maybe do you mean a therapist not identified with a religious run institution?
Oh, that's a good clarification. I didn't mind that they were with BYU, but it was like, it seemed like they do more of talk therapy, and I wanted to do a specific kind of therapy. I wanted to do like DBT, and maybe I was interested in EMDR because my siblings had been really liking that, and that's just not available at CAPS.
So maybe more clinical psychology treatments from a clinical psychology perspective instead of more counseling psychology.
Right. Yeah.
That's associated with talk therapy. So you do EMDR or exposure therapy or other types of things to treat, chronic depression or chronic anxiety or severe anxiety or depression. And I'm sure all the BYU CAPS psychologists are trained, but it probably sounds like because there's such a large university, so many students in need, they probably offer some general counseling psychology kind of services.
Yeah.
But probably refer externally to the more severe clinical cases. Is that fair? I'm not trying to.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification because you know all of the terminology and I don't want to not give BYU the credit that they deserve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you start seeking clinical psychology.
Yeah, I wanted to have I guess that's the right term, clinical psychology, because it seemed like what I was doing at BYU was nice, but it didn't seem to be like fixing anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at that point I was able to find a like a DBT therapist. And so we would work on, I don't know if this is super relevant, like practicing mindfulness and practicing acceptance of how you feel right now. You know, it's like, how I feel is how I feel. And it's like, okay, you know. But I also kind of in the back of my mind was, I also need help with my faith crisis because it's freaking me out. Mm-hmm. And it'd be nice to have a therapist.
Just a tiny bit of psychoeducation. DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. It's considered kind of a third or fourth generation form of cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot like another form that I was trained in as well called acceptance commitment therapy. But these are forms of cognitive behavioral therapy that merge mindfulness techniques and meditation into traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. And in the case of DBT, it was developed for clients with borderline personality disorder, but it turns out it's just great skills to learn to understand your emotions, to regulate your emotions, to do what's called distress tolerance regulation, where you learn how to manage your emotions when you're really, really, distressed psychologically, and just basic mindfulness skills, meditation, really solid stuff. Everyone in the world would benefit from DBT, not just people who need clinical psychology support. It's just basic life skills for mental health. And I would say acceptance commitment therapy is very similar. So just for those who are seeking additional support, I wanted to spell out some of those acronyms so that people could get the help they need. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt really good to take care of myself in this way because it seemed like kind of the way that I grew up and the information that was available around me seemed like I needed like a heavy course in like what to do when you have feelings. And that's kind of what DBT did for me, was help me figure out like, oh, I'm angry, but that's okay. It just means like something doesn't seem right. That's all. It's not bad to be angry. But again, going back to my like kind of things that I was noticing about my faith was I was starting to notice this pattern of what I felt to be the Holy Ghost was typically like kind of warnings or like the things that I when I felt scared, I was like, oh, that's the Holy Ghost telling me not to do that. And then when I felt when I felt the Spirit like positively, not as a warning, as a comforter, it was like moments of feeling love. But I started to realize that when I felt scared of stuff, that didn't mean really anything besides that I just felt scared. And it was just my anxiety disorder or even just normal feelings. And I thought, oh no. Like, well, what if this is like, if my feelings, like, okay, I guess I learned wrong about what my feelings are because they're not all the Holy Ghost. And every time I feel good, that's because I'm like taking care of myself and respecting my own boundaries and my needs and doing things that are nice, you know, singing good music. So that fall, we went back to school and our faculty was amazing. And they did a ton of research and they figured out how many air purifiers we had to have in all the rooms to have the right amount of circulation and the kind of masks we needed to wear. And we were like the only school that went back like kind of to normal at all that semester. And I was in the presidency in BYU Singers. So I was kind of helping getting everything going. But as I got back into things and I started singing, the same music, the feeling was totally different. as I was learning that, it was beautiful music. And I started to think that's all it was. And my whole life had led me to music as a way to access God. And it was gone. And everyone around me, it felt like they were behind a curtain almost. They used to be all my closest friends, and it used to be the most special, sacred experience when we sang together. But now, every time we sang something beautiful, I just felt so lonely and so scared that what if self in the world was a lie?
That's the Holy Ghost, and that means the church is true.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a negative feeling like a doubt or a question or anger or sadness, don't have that feeling, that's not righteous, or that's contention, it's of the devil, or you're not being faithful if you have negative feelings. So we're taught to distrust and dislike and push away negative emotion,
Mm-hmm.
when really it serves an important mental health function. Negative emotions are actually important, but we're taught to suppress those and push them away,
Mm-hmm.
taught that they're bad and literally products of evil spirits, frankly. And then all positive emotions.
Yeah, and I know, not everyone is so black and white as this, but I was to have to face that.
So the alternative is if positive emotions aren't manifestations of the Holy Ghost, then what are they?
It was just me. It's just something that felt good. And, I started to realize, when I feel angry about something that I notice that's happening at BYU, it's not Satan. It's something that's wrong. And often something that's really wrong. But the problem was, at this point, I had a very specific reputation with my friends, and I was close to a lot of faculty. And I still thought I would make it, but I felt really lonely. And I knew I needed to talk to someone. I thought it would help a lot. I knew there were, I knew there must be, even just, if I could just talk to my professors, I'm sure they had dealt with the same thing. But I was so scared of telling the wrong person and being reported. By this point, I had kind of been sharing with my siblings who had lost their faith while they were at BYU, all my ups and downs. And I was able to be really open and honest with them. And I could also share with Zach, thankfully. I'm so grateful we kind of felt all this together. But I didn't dare tell anyone else because my siblings had been kind of ratted out by just a random person and had really horrible experiences. Almost kicked out of BYU. One of them ended up just dropping out because it was so terrible. And that situation's still kind of unresolved. And they, you know, kind of shared with me they had friends who had, you know, been kicked out, lost their housing, lost everything. And, you know, I still thought I was going to be able to make it work. So I was scared to lose it all, you know. So I just didn't tell anyone. So
what does that do to you when you just keep something like that inside and you're so afraid?
I just shrank.
You shrank?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Before I had this kind of conflict inside, I used to be so excited about not just the gospel, but also about music. And I had a really cool job as a music history TA and just a lot of things. I had a lot of excitement about life and people I like to talk to, friends, things I was interested in, you know, goals and things, but it just felt like it wasn't safe to do anything or to talk to anyone. So I kind of just closed everything off and I kept it all inside. And I had to, when I was around anyone at school or kind of just anyone at all who didn't know, I had to pretend that everything was fine because I didn't want them to know that it wasn't. Or I could maybe say like, oh, I'm just having a lot of anxiety right now. It's hard, but it was a lie. And that doing that every day over and over, having to lie to your friends. It's so lonely. I really wish it could have been safe for me to talk to everyone that I wanted to. And I really wish it would be safe for everyone who goes through this to be able to talk to people. Because I don't think the isolation made it any more likely for me to go through with my faith intact.
Isolation didn't help anyone, the church included.
So, yeah, that year.
I mean, I'll just thank you. Yeah. That was so beautiful. And I think Margi and I are both feeling for you. I think if I'm wondering what's going on with BYU, it's that they view doubt as a virus like COVID. Mm-hmm. And that if students are allowed to talk about their doubts, the virus will just spread like the pandemic and everyone's going to get infected. So they'd rather people, unfortunately, suffer in silence. It's kind of like the Book of Mormon saying it's better that one man perish than an entire nation dwindle in unbelief. I'm sure the church feels like it's better that Allie suffer than that the entire BYU student body dwindle in unbelief. Mm-hmm.
One thing that really sticks out to me is just the sudden, it's almost like I don't know what to compare it to, but you have this internal shift, but your experience, where you experience joy, this tremendous joy and belonging, and connectedness with this group of people. It was almost like elation. I could feel your elation as you were talking about what it meant to you and what you felt and all that. You have this internal shift go on. No one can see, right? And it's like pain. It's like the opposite. You go from experiencing that to this absolute isolation, pain, loss, where there once was, joy. You're in this place of mourning because now you no longer have access to those same, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just how it flipped. And as deeply as you felt the joy at one point, you're now in a place of tremendous suffering,
Mm-hmm. And just the more it happens, the more it piles on, and you realize I'm not the only student this has happened to. I personally know people who this has happened to. The honor code reversal happened that spring.
Where BYU said that gay people could hold hands or date and then took it back, right?
Yeah. And I was so sad about that, but I was so scared. I wanted to get involved, but I was so scared of being called into question. I can remember sitting in the office that I worked in the music building, and looking out the window. Seeing the students, wearing the flags and marching.
Rainbow flags? To show support for LGBT BYU students.
It just, wishing I could be there, but being so scared. I also was part of a concert, Lamb of God thing I wanted to get into. There are probably a lot of LDS listeners who know about Rob Gardner's Lamb of God. For those who don't know, it's a modern day sort of oratorio telling the story of Jesus Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And it's got an orchestra and a chorus and different soloists who are different characters throughout the story. And Rob Gardner, I don't know if he's a BYU alumni, but he's a very prominent LDS composer. And he was wanting to, 2019, 2020, do film a whole, concert, the whole concert, so he could have it on DVD and put it in theaters. Because the last recording they'd done had been a while ago. And so, since I was in BYU Singers and I was in the presidency, I had the opportunity to be a part of that, as well as several other members of the choir. And so it was kind of higher than I had even dreamed of an experience that I would have while I was at BYU. I wasn't just getting to sing in general conference every now and then. Here I was having a professional opportunity to work with church related choral music, which is my dream. But while I was getting signed up, I was just kind of feeling dread and worry about it. And then when we were there singing the music and filming, there was just like a disconnect of, I couldn't like fall apart because, you know, I had to be able to sing. I was like, why this music about like Jesus in Gethsemane? Why doesn't it feel the way it used to? And the other students around me, you know, were having the experience of a lifetime, and I was just trying to get through it. And I had a few opportunities to sing in BYU devotionals as a soloist, which you don't get to do until you're a senior or even a grad student. So it's really a privilege to be picked by the faculty to get to do this. Usually you don't have a lot of notice, and I certainly did not. You have to be ready with a song to just go. But it just felt so empty and so anticlimactic. It was something I'd looked forward to for so long. And I just wanted it to be over. Career-wise at this point, I was starting to think I really did want to make performing work, and I was realizing I didn't do enough opera productions when I was a younger student because I had kind of waited till the last 2 years to do them. So I thought it would be really smart to stay around for another year and do another opera, as well as take acting classes, since it's kind of a given that you have to be able to act to be a performer, and I had not really had any good acting classes or much acting experience. So I thought that would be really helpful for grad school and on. I had also been emailing faculty who teach like music recording and electronic music type courses that aren't typically given to classical singers, but I thought these are things that would be really good for me to know, and I think I'm going to stick around another year, so let me see if I can take these classes. And they did actually like make the exception that they were going to let me take the classes. So I was getting everything lined up to have another year of just like really working on my skills. I knew it was going to be hard, but it seemed like the right thing to do for my job. There was one day in February, I think I have it written down. I'd want to read it if I do.
Is that February of this year?
February of 2021.
Okay, last year.
Yeah. Let's see.
While she's looking, Margie, I'm wondering if you have any reflections on what you've heard so far, especially as Allie reflects on kind of reaching the pinnacle of her vocal performance and just feeling so empty inside.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about was just which is so common when we think about how faith transitions work, and sometimes transitions in general. I mean, life is filled with transitions, but is just that moment where it's like the dissolution of meaning. The things that once brought you meaning, the things that you once kind of strived for, no longer provide that meaning anymore. And so you're showing up kind of in in your life, but you're new, or you're not the same. And it can feel so completely disorienting to be back in, it almost feels like an old life because you are new in it, and it feels so empty, and it can just feel tremendously, I really relate to it. It can feel tremendously disorienting and heavy and dark. and just full of loss.
For some reason, I'm reminded of the saying that Christ had, putting new wine into old bottles.
Yeah. Yeah, so I, at this point, kind of stopped reading my scriptures, and I stopped listening to conference. I even tried not to pray, but it wasn't the reason that I thought that when this happens to people, I thought if you stop doing everything, you'll lose your faith. But what it was every time I interact with something from the church, it hurts my faith. So I can only hold on by keeping myself as far away as possible.
That's such a good point.
Yeah. There was a day in February. It was February 11th. So kind of the middle of the semester, I guess. Middle of 2021. I was walking. I can remember walking in my apartment. I walked from my bedroom through the doorway into the living room. And I just, it just hit my body. It was like a spiritual, it was as though I had been told by the Holy Ghost, but it was just the strongest knowledge within my body that I can't do this anymore. And that there is, it's not a question. I don't believe in God anymore. And I need to graduate, or I'm not going to make it. And I went in my room and I cried. And I told Zach. I think at that point he had kind of come to the same conclusion. This is what I wrote in my journal. It still is a little bit trying to make it sound like things were okay. I was still not 100% honest with myself, I think, but this is what I said. I didn't feel like writing about this process, but I'm leaving the LDS Church. Probably also graduating this summer instead of next, like I had planned. It's hard to accept not having another year of choir. I think I need to put myself first, though, ? I'm past at least the first wave of feeling really sad and distressed about it, and I really look forward to not having to pretend anymore. I feel really lucky that Zach and I are on the same page. It's scary to lose my social structure. I really lack confidence with making friends and feeling valuable in that way. I think this will be hard and stretching. I'm hopeful that I will grow and maybe feel good in the long run. So at that point, I had not listened to any podcasts or looked at the CES letter.
What's most notable to me, and Margi, I'm sure you'll feel similarly, is you were listening to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does feel like a moment of you're throwing a life preserver to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
From you to you.
Yeah. Luckily, I had already kind of planned through my classes, and I was that semester finishing up the classes I needed to graduate.
Yeah.
So I was just, at that point, I did how I feel, and I can't go back for it. So I'm I'd better darn sure be right. So I started going on ExMormon Reddit, and I felt a lot of community there. And I started listening to Mormon Stories podcasts. Someone recommended to me, a cousin.
Those cousins.
Yeah. The first one I remember like really, really resonating with was Gretchen Day, her interview.
That's about perfectionism.
Yeah.
It's about a Mormon housewife, ton of kids, raising them all in Utah County. Right? In it to win it. I can see why that would resonate with you.
Yeah. I listened to RFM's investigation of the MTC sex scandal, which, I don't know, that is just one example of many, many things that I did not know. Just, it seems like every week I learn of just another atrocity that has either been like committed and swept under the rug or just never even acknowledged. If it's kind of public knowledge, there have been so many things that I've learned that have happened throughout the history of the church that made me feel really sick and gross about things. It made me feel like, yeah, I think my inner sense is right.
Mm-hmm. So as you listened, it sounds like the more you listened, the more you actually felt affirmed.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that your voice actually...
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like I kind of had reached the point where I knew like it would be pretty much of a miracle for me to ever have faith again in anything. And I actually started to feel really sad about nihilism and having to cope with my marriage is not eternal and when we die, we die.
Really quickly, just a couple questions. The first is, you said you needed to leave BYU in the church or you wouldn't make it, I believe was the words you used. Do you mind being explicit about what you meant by not making it? Just because sometimes I think people underestimate how significant a faith crisis can be.
Yeah. So at that point, I was not having any like strong suicidal ideation, but I was starting to get really, really depressed. I was normally a pretty good student. If I didn't have all straight A's, I usually, went to all my classes and things. I was only taking 6 credits this semester, which was, I was in like 2 or 3 classes. And that one of them was like, it wasn't a class. It was just me practicing for my recital. And I spent most of my time on the couch. And if I wasn't just like dragging myself to do my homework, which was hardly any, but it was so hard to do. I was on like ExMormon Reddit, trying to feel less alone or like sleeping.
Yeah.
And I could tell like if I keep trying to do this, it's going to get really bad.
Your body was kind of shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's that sense of like withdrawing from life, like getting further and further away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think I could tell like I'm damaging not only myself, but my relation, like any possibility of me still being involved with music. And I really was hopeful that I would be able to like keep that. So I was really scared of losing that too.
That so makes sense because it feels like to me at this point is like music is still life, to you and purpose.
Yeah. So
you intuitively kind of realizing, if I mess with those, we're going to go down to the roots.
It'll be nothing.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to make sure we got clarity on, a lot of times people want to blame, let's just say, me or Mormon Stories, or even Jeremy Reynolds or the CES Letter or RFM or Bill Reel or the Church Essays for the Faith Crisis or whatever. And that's fine. People are going to blame whatever they're going to blame. But as far as Mormon Stories podcast goes, just so that people can have an understanding of how it works, my understanding is people usually don't lose their faith from a podcast like Mormon Stories. They lose their faith from the lived Mormon experience. Then they're open to whatever resources they can find to help them process it. And when they come to someplace like Mormon Stories, it's to, like you say, not feel crazy, not feel alone, get validated, and help them process their emotions after their faith had already been lost. Am I getting that right or not?
Totally. Yeah.
And again, not to like say, don't blame me, or to make it about, but it just so people understand the function of what these stories, the role these stories play.
Yeah. This podcast is, very, very kind towards the church. There are some that are less kind. And I appreciate both. I think both are needed. But it's, the reason that they exist is because when you lose your whole sense of like everything that I thought was real, or the way that I thought about life and the goals that I had and the way that I interacted with people, the things that are important, like it all shifts and you feel really alone. And it's super helpful to even just listen to someone who's felt the same way. Even if, like me, you're a BYU student, you can't tell anyone because someone could tell your bishop, you could get kicked out of school. So like, it wasn't safe for me yet to like talk to anyone, but I could like listen to someone else who felt the same and know, okay, right now it hurts a lot and it feels really lonely, but someone else has felt this way too.
It's particularly helpful when you feel alone at BYU and you feel like you can't talk to anybody because it's not safe.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of like being in a dark room by yourself. And then when you're listening to, the interviews of other people, they join you. And then slowly your room starts filling up with, it's not just you.
Yeah, I can't say how many times I've listened to someone's story on this podcast and just cried with them, 2 months later, 2 years later, just feeling so seen as well as feeling like I see them. This has been really healing for me.
And now that's what you're offering others.
You may be joining someone in their dark room.
Well, I could tell you it's going to be okay.
You broke the fourth wall.
There it is.
She's like, where do I look? Where do I look at you or the camera?
Yeah.
Like, depends if you want to break the fourth wall. You broke it.
I broke it. Oh, yeah. So at this point, choir just became rather unbearable. And I still had to do my senior recital, which it was getting to the point where I could barely get myself to practice at all. So fortunately, I had kind of already figured out all of my repertoire for my recital and kind of had stuff mostly memorized. There was one choir song that I wanted to kind of get into a little bit. For my last BYU Singers concert ever, we did a group of hymns as well as arrangements by BYU composers who were like alumni or professors there. And at this point, I had gone to, I don't want to say who it was because I don't want to get them in trouble, but I had talked to a BYU faculty member. I hadn't really said what had happened, but I said, I realize I'm not going to be able to be at BYU anymore because of philosophical reasons. Cried a little bit. I think they got it. And I said, well, do you think I'll be okay if I had these plans to take all these extra courses to kind of build up my skills to help me be more competitive? Do you think I'll be okay? And they said, yes, I think you'll be okay. Like, go ahead and graduate, take care of yourself. So I was able to at least have that one interaction, which is really awesome. But yeah, so I had sort of one safe person, at least at school. But there was this concert and there was this one song that was really hard to sing. I mean, we were singing "If There's Sunshine in My Soul Today," which used to be one of my favorite hymns. And at that point in time, and still right now, is really painful because it's kind of all of my toxic perfectionism put into a song. Yeah, so that was in the program. And then this song with the text is kind of like a weird modern song, so you can't look up a recording. I don't think there's one. But I'll just read the lyrics. O ye fair ones, how could ye have departed? How could ye have rejected that Jesus who stood with open arms to receive you? Behold, if ye had not done this, ye would not have fallen. But behold, ye are fallen. O ye fair ones, sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives. Ye fair ones, how is it that ye could have fallen? But behold, ye are gone, and my sorrows cannot bring your return. So there I was, on stage, surrounded by, I suppose, believing fellow students. I mean, we couldn't really talk about it with each other. I was singing about how it was my fault that I had lost my faith and I was lost forever. And when we were in class the next day, listening to the recordings of the concert, that song turned on and I just started crying and I just got up and left.
What was that second hymn called?
This one?
Yeah.
It was a text from the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I think Mormon 6, O ye fair ones. Mm-hmm. It's written by Christiansen, who is, side note, a really cool composer. But it was not a great song for me to sing at the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is the kind of messaging that's really common at BYU. You don't have to be in the choirs to be hearing this. It's in the devotionals. It's in the classrooms. You know, most classes, there's a prayer beforehand. If you're called on and you aren't comfortable, what do? Like, do you say no and draw attention to yourself? Or if there's there's a gospel discussion happening, or people are trying to have like a institute thing and they want you to come. It's like so ingrained into every aspect of life. You can't get away from it. There was a little bit of like kind of speaking up that I did do while I was there. I was becoming quite the feminist, or at least having a bit of like maybe feeling like there was so much going on that I couldn't do anything about, but that felt like sort of a safe way I could push back a little bit. So I ended up meeting with one of my music history professors and saying like, hey, I just took like the final semester of music history, which is supposed to cover modern composers, and there were only 2 songs by women
Out of
like 50, maybe. And I had noticed like, okay, throughout all the previous centuries that we studied, I know there were a lot of women who were composing, but it kind of makes sense. Like I could see the academic reasoning why, like, well, we're going to be expected to like know Mozart and Bach and Brahms and Beethoven, Debussy. Like it's hard to get along if you don't know all these people. And if you give a lot of extra stuff to study, like I could see why they wouldn't take the time to like find obscure female composers for us to learn. But I was like, why aren't we learning? Like people who are composing today, 50 years ago, are relevant to our careers. And the answer I got was this: they said, you're not wrong, but it's too much work for me to figure it out, so I just don't do it. I was like, oh, that's, I guess, okay.
Were you about to swear?
Maybe. Yeah, there was definitely, besides just the music history, you know, everyone at BYU in the music school, although most of the students are women, the people who get opportunities, who are, you know, when we sing works composed by students, or, you know, a lot of the grad students are men. Because culturally we know it is the man's job to take care of his family. So anytime there's a man studying music, it's very risky because they need to be able to make a lot of money. So it behooves the school to give them all the opportunities so they can do well with their career. And I never got to see representation of women being either historically or in the present given opportunities outside of being hired to teach voice lessons. And that really bothered me. So I actually was able to arrange my senior recital to be kind of a mini music history lesson. And we're required to sing music through a certain, like, lots of different time periods to show we've kind of learned different styles. So I made it a point to look through and find like more than half of my music be by women. And that was really cool. And I also, they were sending out surveys that year, the School of Music, about how the school was doing with race and inclusiveness. And they had a little thing to fill out and a way to like comment for feedback. And I commented and said, like, I really care about how this is doing, and like I'd love to talk to you. So I was able to talk to like kind of an upper level school admin and tell them my frustrations with at least, you know, the lack of diversity in the programs. There weren't, as far as I was aware, ever in my time at BYU, any Black students in my program, for example. And I thought that was wild, because I know there are a lot of Mormons who love to sing. So I got to like work as a kind of research assistant to help them record school information, like kind of put data in for them to be able to make changes. So that felt really good to speak up, at least in those ways. And for my recital, I was able to have some people come in person. At that point, they were letting you bring like 20 guests. So I got through my music. My last few pieces were Emily Dickinson poems about her thoughts on death, because I had just kind of been interested in her music early on, but I thought it was really fitting for faith crisis. So that was kind of a healing experience. Even though no one else really knew what I was singing about, I knew what I was singing about. And I made it to graduation. I graduated. Yeah.
How did that feel?
I felt like skin in my teeth. I don't know, I thought it would feel way more relieving than it did. You know, in some ways it was like, oh, finally I can relax a little bit and I can kind of start now to figure out like, where am I? And how do I feel about all these things that I've just been having to do? Like, do I want to still do them all? I think I did try coffee like a week before I graduated, because it was kind of spontaneous. All the other rules I kept, but I was able to kind of start figuring that out, which felt really good. I never really, you could probably guess, had a rebellious teenage phase. So it felt like I was finally like, oh, I could try different clothes and I could do all these things that I thought were evil, but I now think they're okay probably. And like, I can decide for myself what I think. Mm-hmm. So that was really liberating.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a few questions just to close out your BYU experience? Is that okay? So, I think I have at least 3 or 4 questions. So first is, and this is the dumbest question of all, but it's one that Orthodox Mormons are going to put on you, which is common. Whenever the news is leaked about a BYU student that gets kicked out or whatever, or a student that's saying this isn't fair, the way that my education is jeopardized because I lost my faith, the common answer from an Orthodox member is you signed the honor code, you knew what you were getting into before you signed the honor code. So then once you lost your faith while you were at BYU, the only thing to do as an act of integrity is to resign, to leave the school, but to continue and pretend, in the worst case, hide or lie, or break the honor code potentially while you remain a student, you're taking the place of other students, and you're even benefiting from a tuition discount, all while you're failing to live up to the honor code that you signed up for when you started. That's one huge act of dishonesty and a lack of integrity. You should have just resigned the minute that you knew you didn't believe anymore. That's an extreme case, but there are people with variations on that position, that it's on you. You knew what you were signing up for. So no crocodile tears for you. What do you have a response to that sort of position?
I understand that way of thinking. I used to feel that way a little bit. Or at least I didn't used to understand why, like, I thought it was a choice kind of, or an act, a purposeful act, you could say, to like kind of lose your faith. And I have, at the time I kind of struggled with feeling guilty about that. There are a few things I could say to that. I think one is every student who goes there is like 18 or 19, or maybe if they're off their mission, 21. And we are all I think for the most part, intend to do what we say we want to do. And we're still, our brains are not done growing. And we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. And as has been my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experience, you don't actually get to like choose whether or not you have belief and faith in something to some extent. Like, I was much happier while I was at BYU when I had my faith, and I did not want to lose my faith, and that was not my plan. And I honestly, if I had been able to say, hey, I lost my faith and I'll just like pay non-member tuition, like I would have done that, because that would have felt better for me. It did not feel good to lie. But the thing is, one, the process of kind of losing your faith while you're in such a monocultured climate is really draining and really hard. And by the time you go through that, like whether or not it happened when you were maybe in high school, you kind of were forced into BYU, or maybe it happened while you were in BYU, you don't really, you need like some time to heal, and you don't really have the energy to go to another school and explain to them like, please accept me even though I have this like X list red mark on my transcript that I'm a terrible student. Like, please let me explain to you my deepest traumas, and hopefully you will understand and accept me into your program. You have to uproot all your life. Like, moving is expensive. It's just, for most people, not feasible to be able to make that change fluidly in the way that it would need to go for it to not be a huge, huge problem. Does that answer the question?
And I'll just maybe ask you as well, was there an informed consent issue? In other words, when you signed the honor code, did you have all the information to be able to make an informed decision and that type of commitment?
Yeah, you could say if you're going to have someone sign all of these rules, you should give them maybe the history of where all these rules came from. And you don't even know when you're signing up. Like, a lot of people don't know, if I lose my faith, like, I'm going to get expelled. Or like, what if I kind of have a sexual awakening and realize like, oh, maybe I'm bi or I'm gay while you're in school. You aren't really planning on that. Or maybe you already know, but you think it'll work out. But it's one thing to like have an idea in your head, and another thing to have the experience. And then we also, as students, don't have, the information on how BYU has hurt a lot of people. We don't know all of the church's history. We would have to know a lot before that amount of promising would be fair. Yeah. That felt a little rambly. Did that make sense?
No, it made perfect sense.
Okay.
Like issues around the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham and Joseph Smith and his polygamy and racism and sexism and homophobia in the church. I guess most prospective BYU students are ignorant of all those problems when they sign the honor code. And maybe if they had been given all that information before, maybe they wouldn't have signed the honor code. Maybe they would have chose to go to a different university. But by the church withholding that information from the students, in some ways, they're setting some students up for disillusionment later when they weren't given all the cards to begin with.
And I would guess also probably a lot of young students were like I was, where having agency and choosing your gospel path, it wasn't, I just was kind of following the format. So it was like, obviously this is what I want because this is what I've been told my whole life will make me happy. And this is what has worked for me in the past. So like as an 18-year-old, like, yeah, obviously you want to go to BYU and like get married and, you know, go on a mission. There's no way for you to know that that's not going to work, or it's just, you don't know.
Yeah.
You're just a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's the idea of like, I mean, one of the most beautiful, poignant things of many that I heard today was when you said you stopped praying and reading the scriptures because that was damaging your faith. You stopped praying and reading the scriptures to try and fight to preserve your faith. And what also seems connected for me to that is the fact that you're forced at BYU as a student to go to church. So what's it like, compulsory Sunday church attendance? What's that like when you're a BYU student and maybe you don't believe anymore? Can you talk about what that's like? And the games students sometimes have to play?
Yeah. Well, I was kind of lucky. I mean, the pandemic has been terrible, but I was a little bit lucky how my timing worked out because Zach graduated like right when the pandemic happened, so he didn't have to keep faking anymore. You know, he didn't have to like try anymore to have that illusion of faith. And I was able to just kind of log on to Zoom and then turn off the camera and mute it and turn off my volume. So every Sunday I would just kind of pretend I went to church. And then when it was Relief Society, I would maybe go in for a couple minutes and like say hi, maybe answer a question. So it seemed like I was involved, and then like turn it back off. But yeah, it's just kind of more of the like policing and hypervigilance. Just one more aspect of your life where you're so confused and slowly like everything that you thought is like changing and it's all just draining away. And somehow you gotta keep pretending it's fine because you want it to be fine. So you can't talk to anyone. That's what it's like. There's actually kind of a funny story about that. I skipped if we want it. Our last like bishop that we had was, he was put in the ward right during the pandemic. So we hadn't like met in person. So he didn't know us as well, which felt maybe fortuitous somewhat since I had been more close with the previous bishop since I had been playing for church. So this way I was able to kind of be more of just a detached number. But at one point he had like a tithing. We had our tithing settlements and I was still paying tithing because it felt like what I needed to do to be an honest BYU student. Even though at that point it felt really off with my beliefs, but I felt like I needed to do that until I graduated. But Zach was not paying tithing. And he told the bishop that in our tithing settlement. And the bishop was like, "Oh, are you doing okay? Like, do you want to talk about it?" And Zach was kind of like, "No, I don't want to talk about it." Kind of abrupt, like not really wanting to play like he really cared much about the bishop's authority at this point. And a couple months later, the bishop called me and said, like, hey, I've been thinking about you and your husband, and I'm worried that he's like dragging you down. Basically, he felt like he, as my priesthood leader, needed to save me from my wicked husband. And at that point, I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to lie to him and say like, oh, we're just like doing mixed faith marriage and it's fine. And I ended up like putting Zach on the phone because I wasn't really sure what to say. I was really flustered, and we just kind of like said that we were fine and reassured him that everything was okay, and then hung up and just kind of laughed because it was so absurd. But there was just like, if the bishop had, if he had been more concerned, he could have easily like gone in and stepped in and realized something was off. And like, I would have been 6 credits away from my degree, and it's all over. Yeah.
And it just seems to me, what's more personal and more sacred than like one's relationship with God, prayer, church attendance? Like that's starting, if there is anything sacred from a Mormon standpoint, it's that. Mm-hmm. So to make it compulsory, to make it tied to your education such that you feel like you have to fake it and lie to please some external authority or out of fear of punishment, feels literally like the antithesis of everything that a righteous, good religious faith should stand for and want, to me.
Yeah.
It's like Satan's plan, basically, of like, I'm going to force you to do good, you know, versus have free agency to choose. I'm just going to force it.
Yeah. It's like realizing, when I was like realizing how lonely and sad I was at BYU, it was like, this is supposed to not be this way, and it is this way. This in itself is like proving to me that this is not led by God, this school.
Yeah. And nobody's winning in this scenario. All right, last question about this sort of thing. Because, I mean, there's a heavy BYU theme here, so I don't want to leave some important stones unturned. Every single semester, I get people reach out to me who are BYU students, sometimes BYU faculty. And it's just like, help, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I find other students like me so I don't feel so alone? We've done episodes on this because years ago there was like a
Bradley and Alana.
Yeah.
They were actually, that was Zach's mission companion.
Oh, okay.
Bradley.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that resource? And I don't even know if it's still active.
It is.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
Some of Zach's friends were at BYU the same time as us. They graduated like maybe a couple years before I did, but Zach and Bradley were super good mission companions. And Bradley and Alana's faith crisis was ahead of ours. And they did a Mormon Stories interview. It's pretty cool. And they also have this website called BYUSurvivalGuide.com. I believe it's .com. You can find it on Reddit and probably on that podcast description too. And it basically tells you like all the things you need to know about all the ways that you could get kicked out of school and ways that you can find other students to be friends with if that feels safe to you. But just like a lot of people don't realize how high the stakes are, and they are maybe more honest and less fearful, less self-protective than I was, and maybe they tell their bishop about their worries. And if you have the wrong bishop, he will say you do not pass the requirements for your ecclesiastical endorsement. You can no longer attend the school, and you can no longer live in your BYU housing. So you're homeless now, unless you can like figure out how to have faith again or whatever. But it's usually, when it gets to that point, pretty high and dry. You're cut off. And since it's a religious university, a private university, they're allowed to seize your transcripts, and you like legally can't even get your transcripts if this happens to you. So you could be not only without a degree, but without any credits at all. So you'd have to completely start over at another school. So it's really risky to be in this situation. So someone has gone through, like Bradley and some of his friends, I guess, they went through and wrote out all the things to be careful of, what you need to do to keep your academic standing in good order and to pass your ecclesiastical endorsement interview. And if you feel like you have to lie, here's a way for you to do that. As well as if you want to find a group of students to connect with, here's a group of students you can connect with them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll include links to those episodes and to the BYU Survival Guide in the show notes of this episode. But it sounds like if we were just going to kind of give the LDS Church and BYU a suggestion, it's like, number one, give prospective students full informed consent so they know ahead of time the risks and the dangers of what they're signing up for. Mm-hmm. So they can know that ahead of time.
And maybe their parents too, because their parents would hopefully be a little more lucid than their children.
And maybe the statistics of how common it is for BYU students, because it's got to be super common these days for BYU students to lose their faith.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So what the probability is that this is going to happen, especially in 2022. So in fully informed consent, but then some sort of path, just like non-Mormons at BYU have a path to become Mormons and then get the tuition break. Like you say, have a path for a Mormon who loses their faith to switch to a non-LDS tuition rate, which almost doesn't make sense because you and your parents have paid tithing up to then. So why should you lose out? But anyway, if that's necessary, if it's a financial thing, provide a pathway to that. Would you be okay in theory with the agreement of like not talking to other BYU students about your faith crisis as a condition of continued, of being a student there? I mean, that's still difficult, but I mean, I'm guessing that the church would want some sort of accommodation, which is don't be spreading the doubt.
Yeah, I think the fear is if you allow apostates among the flock, they will destroy it.
Yeah.
But I think most people just want to feel loved and not feel so alone. So maybe they could have like, okay, only don't like, here are the rules for how to talk to BYU students, and like, let's train our faculty on they can be people you can talk to because a lot of them are doing this anyway. But like maybe just have an expectation you could talk to your professors about it. And if you know of other students who have gone through this process, like maybe you can talk to them about it. Yeah. Although I honestly think if there had been open discourse in my time, like a year ago, 2 years ago, I don't know if I would have completely lost my faith, because what pushed me over was how unsustainable it was and how lonely it was, and realizing this institution is obviously unsafe and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Like, they've hurt me so much, let alone all the other people. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. But if it was safe to talk about things, if people could talk about things, that people wouldn't be pushed away. And people would probably be more mature.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's probably hurting the church to have such strict and unhealthy expectations of BYU students and such severe consequences.
Because at this point, the only people who will talk to you are people who are pretty much on the way out anyways. Yeah. So
I wonder if they could do anything like the therapist-led faith transition groups. Do you know what I mean?
We did that at Utah State University. We had faith crisis support groups at the counseling center, but
you don't see that happening. The
BYU
reason why I thought about that is it contains it. See? So you don't have students. The students that are going through it are being heard and they're able to talk, but they're talking to students that are already going through it, which would make it less likely, theoretically, that which I would feel way better about than sort of this idea of like, just don't talk to people. You can pay the whatever, but just keep it to yourself. That doesn't seem sustainable.
And yet if BYU had they have like pornography support groups in the counseling center. They have like meditation support groups, or
there was a self-compassion group that I went to for a while,
or eating disorder groups. They're going to have a bunch of groups, but if they had a faith crisis support group, number one, that would be acknowledging that openly acknowledging the students do have faith crises, which I think that BYU wouldn't want. And then secondly, it might spread the idea that it's okay. So maybe a compromise would be having these support groups, but not advertising them.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be just interesting? I'm sorry to nerd out, but it would be interesting from a research standpoint, how many leave.
Yeah.
If they did that, if they were willing to acknowledge it, if a therapist was trained to and they actually cared for those people going through what would happen to the statistics of people actually leaving versus just interesting.
No. Worth looking into. But the final thing that I think is just basic decency is don't withhold a transcript. Don't violate a student's progress, cause them to retake a year or two of their coursework and to forfeit tens of thousands of dollars. That's just inhumane. The church has to just stop that.
It's very hateful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Probably creates enemies for life of the church when they do stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, our solidarity to all the BYU students that are out there, and this is going to become a bigger and bigger problem every year, and it's going to keep being a big problem. Not to mention all the BYU faculty that feel trapped, that they can't tell anyone, be honest with their bishop, come out of their loss of faith, that it'll threaten their career because they made the choice to go to BYU when they believed. And now who's going to hire him now that BYU is on their resume? Sometimes that's not true, but sometimes it is.
Yeah. Yeah. As sad as I feel for all the other students in my situation, I just can't imagine what if I worked there and it was like my dream and I was like a religion professor or like a very niche dance department maybe, and it was everything I ever wanted and my whole life was built around it, and then this happened. What do you do?
Yeah.
You can't take care of yourself or your family.
Yeah, and then you are just stuck living a lie that's rotting your soul from the inside out, Well, anyway, BYU, do what is right. Let the consequence follow. I'll just say to you what the church taught me. Is that fair?
Yeah. Alas.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to have faith that will happen ever.
But who knows?
Yeah. Well, now whenever I talk to students, if I ever hear someone who's thinking about going to BYU, I usually tell them, don't go there. Even though I had a lot of really cool experiences, you never know. It's not worth it.
It's true. It just does feel like you take a developing brain during a time of development that is about expansion and exploration, Mm-hmm. And you just kind of, you put those two things together, and then you take this idea of how readily information is now available.
Mm-hmm.
And you just put all those together in a soup, and it's just the odds are not in your favor. The odds are that And this idea of penalizing for those things, the idea that someone has a developing brain, they're in this place of exploration, developmentally and expansion, and then the fact that they stumble upon information that's readily available. They didn't create the information. They're not responsible for the history. They just come upon it and then struggle, and then you punish them. Yeah.
But it's so hard.
Not
like
the
you and I
best.
met at BYU. I had a great experience at BYU. I loved my time at BYU. The athletics, the devotionals, the student life, the dorms, the religious education. Like for me, there was just so much good that was there. Mm-hmm. And then so many amazing departments there, whether it's, graphic design or the dance, the ballroom dance or folk dancing or music. There's just so many amazing departments, accounting and computer science and animation. Like we've often said how much we wish in some ways our own children could have gone to BYU because there's so much good there. So we're torn because at least I still love so much about BYU. So it's really sad for 3 BYU graduates to be sitting here saying we can't recommend BYU anymore. It's sad for me. I don't know if it's sad for you. Is it sad for you, Margi?
I think it's a little less sad for me, but I do think the information piece is a key player, and we didn't have that when we went there.
Yeah.
And to hold kids responsible for what they read or what they stumble upon as they live in the world as it is, for a reality that just is, and then you punish them for that. There's just all manner of wrong in that.
To me, it just speaks of a great built-in fear of, well, what if it happened to me? I don't want it to happen to me, so I'm going to make it really scary. And then, maybe you make this policy and it doesn't happen to you, and good for you, but it's going to happen to someone. And even if you never do, like even if you get through BYU and this never happens to you, it's probably a lot of things you've internalized. They're not great. Not great for your brain.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Even the people who fit in the box, who do all sorts of things to stay in that box, right? So we're not even talking about the people that, it hurts them too.
Mm-hmm. Abuse is abuse. Yeah.
Well, it's hard. It's hard. Well, okay. So how does your story end? I guess it doesn't end with BYU. There's healing and growth for you after BYU.
Yeah. There's kind of a bit of, waiting until I get my transcript, until I resign from the church. And that was pretty scary. There's also a bit of element of going to grad school. You need letters of recommendation from different professors. So if you start making a fuss, as soon as you graduate, that might not happen. You don't know. So I still kind of felt like I needed to be quiet. So I started, telling on Mother's Day that year, I told my parents. And I started telling just like a few individual people, and dealing with, I don't have to get into, but there's lots of stories of extended family just kind of cutting you off, giving you the cold shoulder, which is really painful. Fortunately, my immediate family was able to respond in like a loving way. And by the time I was like really settled on this decision, it was actually only me and my oldest sister left in the church. So my siblings, including my younger siblings, had kind of paved the way and like helped my parents feel a little more at ease with this, so that when it happened with me, it was kind of a surprise, but they knew how to react. which I really was grateful for. Mm-hmm. It was nice to be able to finally tell my parents what was going on.
Are you saying that of the 6 children of your parents, only 1 out of the 6 remains in the church?
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't good numbers.
Well, I think they're
Or
good.
are they good numbers? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
For the church, from the church's perspective, those are, and that's what we're seeing is like 80% across the board, 80% of the kids raised Mormon in the United States these days in 2020 are leaving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess
you're a returned missionary temple married Mormon.
Yeah, I was kind of the most insane, maybe not insane, most I got to do everything of all my siblings.
Most devout of your siblings.
Well,
maybe.
I don't know if that's fair to say.
Up there.
But I was very dedicated to doing all the things in my devotion.
Yeah.
And that didn't help. For my decision to resign from the church rather than just kind of stop going, for me, it felt like I had been held captive, especially being at BYU. So it felt like the best way for me to heal and kind of take my power back was that I needed to not be a member of the church at all. So that was kind of another thing that I think probably a lot of BYU students, because of how shuttered they feel once they leave, they have to resign. Whereas maybe if I was, I don't know, I was talking about this with a former employer who's at the Catholic Cathedral in Salt Lake. He was saying, oh, it's crazy that this has been so hard for you, because when people, if someone's Catholic and this happens, they can keep coming and they'll probably still stay Catholic. They just maybe don't believe, but it just doesn't feel like you can't do that.
Right.
So that was the thing. I also, after this, found a trauma therapist, started doing EMDR for PTSD, which I am diagnosed with now. And I was able to apply to grad schools mostly because I was able to get a lot of help with the essays, because I was still feeling really just gross about life. And I was able to use the recordings from my senior recital as my audition stuff, since it's still kind of COVID.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I'm still right now, kind of as a fallout of all of this, dealing with having a hard time feeling safe while I sing. So there's still kind of a trauma response there, which really sucks when I'm wanting to do that and I have ideas of projects I'm interested in and things I want to start doing for my career, but I can't because I get triggered and I can't physically sing. So the therapy has been really helpful with that, but I'm still kind of still scared for how grad school will go. And I'm hopeful that it's fine, but I'm scared that there's part of me that's scared I'll never really be able to sing like I used to.
And this PTSD diagnosis, is it other stuff that you haven't talked about, or is it sort of
a little bit of both?
Okay.
But this specifically is part of that. Yeah, with music in the church in BYU.
Yeah.
So maybe what percentage of it's Mormon related in one way or the other?
All of it, I would say is Mormon related.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's such a loss.
Yeah. So yeah, that I can't really recommend to other music students to go to BYU because, I mean, in some ways I learned a lot and I had good teachers, but at what cost? I also, this year decided in 22 that I felt comfortable coming out on Facebook. And I didn't explain everything, but it felt weird, monitoring, okay, today I'm going to see these people, so I need to remember to dress like this and not swear around them. That got it started to drag on me. So I felt comfortable posting on Facebook, and I had a flood of BYU friends, past and current, who messaged me with either that this is not their experience, but they really wish they could have talked to me, but they're so sorry. And quite a few people who are in the middle of the struggle, and they can't tell anyone, and they're just terrified. So
the problem's bigger than people might imagine.
Yeah.
It's more common you're finding than you even thought while you were there.
Yeah. And the sad thing was seeing how many people, I only had one person respond kind of negatively, and it was a person I don't really care their opinion of me. But I had a lot of people say really kind things, and I realized it would have been really nice if we could have had this conversation 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who would have been there for me, but they didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where does that take you now?
Yeah. So here I am figuring out what I believe and realizing it's okay to not know everything. Getting ready to go to grad school and leave Utah, be around people who are not going to immediately assume I'm either Mormon or not Mormon. They'll just see me as a person, hopefully. I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to pursuing my career more. And hopefully finding more healing for myself. And when I'm in a good place, it'd be cool to be able to reach out and help other people. Yeah.
Well, this interview is going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, it's helped me. If anything, it's been good for me.
How so?
I love that reframing, because I think that's so Mormon. This idea of helping others and helping, that it's actually, I love that it can be enough if it helps me,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
If it helps you.
If it helps you in saying it. And that's actually the most important. That can be the most important part of this.
Yeah. Realizing that the only thing I can control is if I'm taking care of myself right now, And hopefully we can all take care of ourselves. And if we have people we are in charge of, hopefully we can take care of them too.
Yeah. Well said. Beautiful. So I'm guessing your life's going to be super busy. So if there are BYU students out there that need support, I think generally CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services, is a safe place at BYU to go to.
They don't report to the Honor Code office.
So if you're a BYU student, go to CAPS. That's one thing you can do. Let's go to ExMormon Reddit. Don't go to a Facebook group with your real identity and start sharing things, right?
Yeah, you'll probably get in trouble if you do that.
There's people, the church pays people to watch those groups and turn students in. So be careful what you reveal on Facebook or anywhere your identity can be discovered. But ExMormon Reddit can be safe if you don't dox yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Listening to podcasts can be helpful.
Yeah.
The BYU Survival Guide is a resource. BYU CAPS. Any other resources you can think of?
If you're not too far along in your degree, you've probably heard this advice before, but UVU is pretty good at accepting transfer students. I think they get a lot of transfer students from BYU. So if that's an option for you, it's about the same tuition. So it's not hopefully too bad. And if you can pay for therapy, like outside of BYU, that could be also helpful, just depending on how far along you are and how painful it is to just be on campus at all.
Yeah. 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 All right. Well, Allie, and if people want to reach out to you or get in touch with you, you might be too busy to be fielding questions.
I mean, I probably,
and
I'll probably be having some boundaries around random people reaching out to me, especially if you don't have anything kind to say. We'll ignore it. Mm-hmm. So, you could say what you want, I guess, but I'm not going to pay attention. I guess I've got like my Instagram and my Facebook are private, but my teaching, my performing Instagram is public. So you could contact me there. It's Christiansen Sings, I think. And also my website has like a contact form, so you could email me through there, and that would be pretty private, although I cannot guarantee I will respond. But
I love that.
Yeah.
I love your boundaries.
Maybe in a couple years when I get around to it, I'll respond.
And maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to hire you to sing?
Same, my website.
AllieChristiansen.com, right?
Yeah. It says that I'm still a senior at BYU because I haven't had the energy to rewrite it since then, but I'm not.
Consider yourselves updated.
Yeah.
The graduation happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We're excited for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. For this next kind of chapter, all the change that you have and the new beginnings. Yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate you doing this interview before you take off to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the good kind of scary.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
Well, if it's any consolation, I'm not right now practicing as a psychotherapist, but for trauma, leaning into what you've experienced and doing what are called exposures, which is confronting the pain, telling the story, is often a gateway to some healing. Mm. So it seems to me like what you're doing here is the right direction to be leaning as you're trying to heal, for whatever that's worth. I hope you experience it that way.
We hope so.
Hope you experience it that way.
Cool. Me too. It's been pretty nice so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And a shout out to your partner for his support. Nice job.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have a partner to go through this with. So
I'm really lucky.
Yeah.
In that way.
Yeah. All right. Any final words?
Yes. Take care of yourself. And whether that means right now you're very believing in Mormonism and it works for you, do that. And if it's not working for you, don't do it. And you'll be okay either way. If you want advice.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Or don't take my advice.
That's right.
That's good. All right. Well, thanks, Allie. Good luck.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks, Margi. So great to have you. Thanks for being riding shotgun today. It's always great to have you.
Yeah. I'm glad I was here for it.
And with all our guests that we have on, like Natasha or Samantha, I feel comfortable promoting kind of their private endeavors. And in your case, Margi, you do have a coaching practice where you offer some kind of transition coaching. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I do. Yes. You can find me at beautyinthenow.org. And I am also on Instagram a bit. And it's just Margi Dillon. Yeah.
On Instagram.
On Instagram.
All right. Well, thanks for being a part of this, Margi.
Yeah, I'm really glad. My pleasure.
And thanks everyone for joining us today on Mormon Stories Podcast. We're always grateful to Gerardo Sumano, Jen Camp, Brooklyn, the Open Stories Board, everyone who makes the Open Stories Foundation possible. We're grateful to the donors that make all this possible, the studio, all the equipment, everything. If you support us financially, thank you. If you don't and you want to see this type of programming continue, we always really appreciate those who become monthly donors at MormonStories.org. Your donations are tax deductible in the U.S. We're 100% transparent in our finances, and all your support goes to helping support Mormons in transition and maybe to try and help the church become a healthier place. So thanks for your support. Support us if you can. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com with feedback. Follow us on all the socials. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. And you can find us on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and wherever you do your social medias, we're probably there. But thanks for all the support. Be kind to each other. One more thing.
Sorry, I have one last plug that I forgot about.
Please.
I do actually have a Facebook group for BYU choir alumni who are ex-Mormon.
Whoa,
So-
what's that called?
It's private and hidden
Oh, okay.
because, some people can't say. But if you want to be part of that, you can contact me on Facebook and we will vet you and make sure you're an appropriate person for this group. But we would love to have you there.
So Ali Christiansen's Facebook account.
Yeah. Ali Finlayson is on Facebook.
Ali Finlayson Christiansen.
Yeah.
We'll include that in the show notes as well.
Cool.
And the name of that group again is called what?
There's no public name.
You keep going for that.
No. I just like the idea of it.
Yeah.
So again,
I started a group so that I could feel less lonely, and it's been nice.
And it's BYU singing ex-Mormons basically?
Yeah, if you were in the BYU choirs, you've left the church, it's just like a special kind of pain.
Such a good idea.
Yeah. So we get one another there.
I love it. Okay. Thanks so much, Ali. Thanks, Margi. Thanks, everyone. Be kind to each other. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.